Hello, 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 and welcome, welcome, welcome to TEDx Gateway. TEDx Gateway is coming to you from Mumbai, but we are basically streaming and streamcasting all over the world. My name is Ralph Simon. I'm actually in London doing this special session today with one of the most important speakers on contemporary affairs and major crises, and also what the future is going to be, the wonderful Parag Khanna. And we'll be introducing Parag in just a short moment. But just to give you an idea, those of you that are not familiar with Parag, he is probably the world's most eminent futurist, and he's the founder and managing partner of Future Maps, which is a data-driven strategic advisory firm. He's also written several books about international relations, about globalization and technology. The titles, for example, The Future is Asian, Commerce, Conflict, and Culture in the 21st Century, Technocracy in America, The Rise of the Info State, Connectography, Mapping the Future of Global Civilization. And he has a wonderful new book that is coming out, which we'll be speaking about in this particular session. And in fact, what he does is he really considers the way that the world works and the way that the world will work. And one of his big issues, which we'll be talking about today, is about humanity being on the move. Now, here's something interesting. And before we do, we'd just like to say hello to all of our viewers, those of you that are in Gujarat, Kemcho, those of you that are in the Punjab, Sat Sri Akal, namaste to everybody in Mumbai and around India. In Tamil, for anyone in Tamil Nadu, Vanakkam. And in Telugu, we'd like to say Namaskaram. And of course, in Bengali, Namaskar. So we've got a big audience. And so what we'll do today is we'll start off by having a very interesting presentation. Parag, why don't we do that? And just before we do, we'd just like to say this. Whatever the next normal is, it will not adapt to us. We're now moving to a post-COVID period. And in this post-COVID period, we've got to adjust and think about what is the world going to be doing? Because interestingly enough, throughout history, the animal species, humans, have had one common means of adaptation, and that is to move. We humans have a fight or flight instinct, and our response to civil war or drought is a sensible one. We move. So like our forebears thousands of years ago, we are becoming a migratory species again. And in the decades ahead, billions of people may relocate from coastal to inland regions, from low-lying to higher elevation areas, from overpriced and affordable cities, and from failing to stable societies. So where will we go? The answer is from south to north and from south to south. So let's take it over to Parag Khanna. Parag, welcome to TEDx Gateway.
Well, Ralph, thank you so much. Such a pleasure to see you again, albeit virtual. And in fact, this is the second webinar that we've done together under the auspices of the great team at TEDx Gateway. Thank you all so much for hosting me again and allowing Ralph and I to have this great conversation. It's especially timely now in my new book, Move. It's not just about the future of the human population globally and our demographics and mobility, but there's a big emphasis actually on the global Indians of the future. And hence I titled this presentation, as you'll see very appropriately, Why the Future is Brown, or The Future is Brown. So let's get into it. I'm sure you're very excited to know why that's the case. Let's start with our basic human geography, and that's my starting point for this book. We are a population of about 8 billion people, and most of the world's population, of course, is Asian. Remember from my last book, The Future is Asian, I talked a lot about the demographic momentum, the youth, and the growing intensity of relations among Asian societies. And you may have heard that just last month, China released its most recent census, and their population is 120 million people less than they thought it was going to be. So it could be that India alone already has more people than China, let alone South Asia more broadly, which has certainly the other several hundred million people from Pakistan to Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal, and so forth. So our human geography remains very much centered upon Asia. And that is my point of departure. Not only the numbers, but remember also the youth. But we've got a problem: climate change. Now, this is a map that comes from NASA, NOAA, the IPCC. What they've been doing is piecing together the sort of, climate models to look at which geographies are going to become more or less livable over time as temperatures rise. 1 degree Celsius, 2 degrees Celsius, hopefully not beyond, but, things don't look very positive or optimistic in that regard right now. Now, red does not mean that a place cannot be inhabited. That would be very bad news for everyone in South Asia. But it does mean decreasingly livable. Now, we do need to take this science very, very seriously, because if you're in India right now, you know the challenges that we're having around zero-day events, falling water tables, and all of the other climate change related phenomena. The same is true in many other parts of the world, even in water-rich countries like Brazil, given the rising temperatures and droughts that are afflicting their agricultural region, obviously the deforestation of the Amazon and so forth. Green regions are becoming more livable. Think about Russia. A generation or two ago, you wouldn't say, yes, I want to go live in Russia. But if you think about what's happening to the country due to climate change, it is, from an ecological standpoint, environmental standpoint, becoming more livable. Now, the other irony is that the countries in green are also the most rapidly depopulating countries in the world. So they're becoming more livable while their populations are shrinking. And I ask myself in this study that I've undertaken, what are we going to do to correct that? Are we going to correct it? Is there going to be a significant migration of people around the world from red zones to green zones? Now, you notice in this map, there aren't borders as such. And of course, borders inhibit our international mobility. But in a borderless world, you could imagine that people would wish to relocate to green zones. Now, in terms of borders and migration, we have settled into fairly stable patterns of mobility. The largest movement of people or stock of foreigners in the world outside of their country within a region is actually people from the former Soviet Union over the last 30 years, just moving into neighboring countries. You've had, of course, Indians and Pakistanis in the Gulf countries. You have Europeans within Europe, a large number of Latin Americans in North America, Africans within Africa, and so forth. So we've settled into these fairly stable migration patterns. But again, superimpose the climate map on top of this and ask yourself, is the future going to be just a continuation of this pattern, especially in light of the pandemic, where people have more or less returned home? But is that really going to be stable in a climate change future? Probably not. Now, again, let's bring it back to Asians. The world population is reaching a plateau. About 8 billion people is where we are now. I predict we will not even get to 8.5 or 9 billion people, probably not more than 9 billion people. Now, you could say, okay, that's very good for the environment. That's good in terms of climate change. We don't want more and more people and overconsumption of resources. But it also means that with a finite world population, rather than one that is constantly growing, where young people are matters a lot. Because if your society, if your country doesn't have young people in its labor force, as students, as taxpayers, caregivers, construction workers, entrepreneurs, IT professionals, then you're basically a dying country, right? You need to have young people. You need a balance between young and old. And the young people are in Asia. In fact, and I want everyone to remember this, the future of the human species depends on Asian youth. The most important category and the most coherent category of human beings in the world is Asian youth. 2 words, Asian youth. Never forget it. Many of you are in that group, because the rest of the world's population is contracting, is shrinking. Fertility rates are low. Mortality is rising, right? If you look at these charts, what you basically see is that in most of the world, the population is declining, but only in Asia And again, with the exception of China, even China's population is declining. The growth is in West Asia, in South Asia, and in Southeast Asia. That is where the young people are and will continue to be. In fact, if you look on the bottom chart, there's 822 million working age millennials just in Asia. And as you can see, there's more in India than in China because India's median age is much younger than China's median age. And it's much larger than the working age youth population of Europe or the United States. So again, Asian youth. What does this mean? Well, we're going to be in a war for young talent. Asia has the young people. As Asian youth vote with their feet, you determine the winners and the losers of the 21st century. That is demographic determinism, but it's true. So with that in mind, question becomes, why is the future brown? Well, as I just indicated, it's not just about how many people you have, it's how many young people you have. And the median age, not just in India, but also Pakistan, Bangladesh, Southeast Asian countries, is significantly younger than the median age of Japan or China or Korea. Those countries are aging much more rapidly. So what I've done here is to compare the Chinese diaspora globally and the Indian diaspora globally and where they are geographically distributed. Now, today, the Chinese diaspora is much larger than the Indian diaspora. But given a wide range of trends that I outline here, basically those roles are going to reverse. There is no question that the Indian diaspora in particular, and the South Asian diaspora in general, will be much larger than the Chinese diaspora in the years ahead. Well, let's look at why. I mentioned the global demographic plateau. I mentioned that Chinese are actually more comfortable moving back to China, and that's starting to happen more and more. Why is that? Well, it has to do with geopolitical suspicions to some degree. It has to do with just moving home, the desire to be at home. Meanwhile, what you have with the South Asian population is that people are young South Asians, young Indians, educated in IT or nursing or medicine, speak English to a greater or lesser degree, are not considered geopolitically threatening, and various other reasons. So young South Asians are more willing to go out into the world, whereas Chinese are to some degree on the retreat. Then, of course, there's the median age and the demand for people in exactly those areas, like nursing, like IT, and so forth, point to a world in which you'll have a lot more South Asians everywhere. Now, let's take a couple of examples. Everyone knows that in the United States, you have a very prominent and large Indian diaspora, numbering nearly 3 million people. The vice president of the United States, of course, is of Indian heritage, mixed heritage, and of course, tech companies and so forth run by Indians. What fewer people are familiar with is that even in Europe, you have a very large and growing number of IT professionals. I tell the story in the book about SAP. SAP is Europe's largest software company. And it has, I think, about 10,000 Indians working for it. And a lot of them are living in Frankfurt. So next time you go to Frankfurt, you'll see a lot more Indian restaurants. You'll see a lot more South Asians. But here's what's interesting. They're getting more and more assimilated, right? They're learning to speak German. Their children go to local schools. They may not go back to India. They represent this enlarging Indian diaspora. And interestingly enough, the more, as we know, migration begets more migration because of chain migration and families. So nowadays, a lot of Indians still want to go to America or Canada because they have family there. And because there are jobs there. But as the European economies and governments realize that they need to import more young people, more skilled young people from India, they're going to recruit them more and more. And that means that you will have friends and family who are in Europe, and it will become more and more natural. So I coined this term, Asian Europeans. And I grew up as sort of an Asian American, born in India, but grew up in Abu Dhabi and then New York, and partially in Germany. So I've been witnessing now over the last 30 years the rise of the Indian population in Germany, but certainly in America, you now have not only the 3 million Indian Americans, but there's a total of about 25 million Asian Americans. By contrast, in Europe, you only have about 4 million Asian Europeans. again, my prediction is that you'll have 20 or 30 million Asian Europeans in the coming 10 years. And many of them, 10 or 15 years, many of them are going to, of course, be Indian. So that's just a teaser around why the future is brown. I've given you a lot of data, a lot of maps. I hope it's a convincing case. It's part and parcel, though, of a much bigger story about the future of our human geography, our distribution around the world, and how we may be becoming a more nomadic species again. And here on this map, what you see is the walk being undertaken by Paul Salopek. Paul is sponsored by National Geographic. He began in the Rift Valley of Africa, of Ethiopia, about 8 years ago, and he's been making his way eastward and will go walk all the way till he reaches the southern tip of South America. And as many of you may know, he spent a good year walking across India. There he is. I walked with him as well, and it was a really, magical experience. He's such a wise person, and I wanted to share this map of his journey. He's in China right now. It's going to be another 10 or 15 years, but I'm committing to support his walk. I've joined the board of his walk. I'm donating the proceeds from the pre-sales of this book to support his walk, because I think it is so emblematic of our migratory past and perhaps our migratory future. And a large part of that future is going to be the brown people, the Indians. So with that, let me pause, hand it back over to you, Ralph, and looking forward to the conversation with you and the whole TEDx Gateway community. Thank you so much. Oh, Ralph, you're on mute.
I think that we are okay. We're ready to go. Oh, there you are. Oh, good. Great. Parag, thank you. That was really, again, as always, inspirational, and great to hear about, first of all, your new book, which is, I've seen some proof copies of it, and it's really very, very interesting, original thinking, and absolutely absorbing. But I wanted to bring in a couple of things that we can talk about in this particular session, Parag, and that is, for about 6,000 years, the world and people have been living in a climate that is around 50 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Well, most humans live in that environment. Obviously, the challenges of the climate crisis are very, very big. The challenges also of economics are very, very big. And of course, in post-COVID recovery, as governments and people are now looking towards, we've got to look at how what was a global lockdown where the world took a pause, things are now moving to try and get back together again. And when you speak about the rise of Asian youth and the opportunities that are coming from it, there are a number of things that I want to speak with you about. And I was actually drawn by a speech given just a couple of days ago by Greta Thunberg, when she was asked to make a comment about the climate crisis. She said, "Enough blah, 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 blah. It's time to get some movement." So Parag, we're looking to you to also help us focus on what you feel is the next phase of globalization. So give us some thoughts, because we are interested to have a look, particularly for the Indian viewers that are watching this, how their skills can help automation, digitization, and basically people want results now. Citizens want results.
Oh, Ralph, that's a great place to start, a great question. Well, I mean, Greta Thunberg means something different with the word movement than I do, of course. So what she's looking to see is action on climate change. And I actually, I use her as a foil in the book for one example. I talk about how if she wants solidarity with the world, because after all, Scandinavia is going to be fine from climate change, right? Scandinavia is not in the same position that Congo is in, and quite frankly, much of India. And I say, the question I ask in the book is, what would Greta Thunberg think about importing 30 million climate refugees? How would she and her country people think? Because you can easily fit 50, 60 million people in Sweden, right? They have less than 10 million people. Anyway, I'm just throwing that out there because what she wants to see is movement towards decarbonization, and I think that's good. Here's another comment, though. Where is the Greta Thunberg of Asia, Ralph? Right? Where is she? Because right now, if you're in Beijing, or Shanghai, there isn't a Fridays for the Future. There isn't a climate strike, right? That doesn't really happen outside of Western countries. And I think it's great as a symbol of civil society, civic activism, and of youth consciousness about the environment. But it doesn't itself solve the problem. What Asians want to see is their governments act immediately on the ground, not their leaders fly to, Scotland to sign declarations. They want to see, less air pollution, right? They want to see renewable energy, and they want to see, irrigation for their farms and that kind of thing. And that's what would constitute action in Asia by Asians' understanding of what constitutes movement and action. And I agree with that.
So let's try and look at some examples. And here are a couple of interesting things. When Angela Merkel, the German chancellor, a couple of years ago, made the decision to allow about 1.5 million people from Syria to come into Germany, people questioned that. And obviously there were many professionals, doctors and well-qualified people that came in that particular grouping. When you spoke about Asian youth and particularly Indians who have either a tech background, a lot have gone to Canada, as you'd mentioned, certainly Germany, when you spoke about Frankfurt as a city that has now got better Indian restaurants than ever before in that city's 2,000-year history. Would we be correct in saying also that with what we have to do for a post-COVID reconstruction is that Indian technology and Indian executives and Indians' abilities and also their English language skills are going to continue to grow in demand?
There's no question about it. And remember that we meaning, I guess I should say rather, governments in northern countries artificially create such a unproductive or less productive economic circumstances by restricting immigration, right? Technology companies in America are the biggest supporters of pro-immigration reform. Google, Facebook, Amazon, LinkedIn, all of them want more migrants. They want the H-1B visa program, which primarily benefits Indian professionals, to be massively expanded, because otherwise they don't get the software engineering talent they need to grow and to achieve all of their mandates and goals. And then they'll just have to outsource more, right, to India. And one of the things that happened, interestingly, during the pandemic is that because remote work became the norm instantly, in February, March of 2020, what the smart companies, long-term oriented companies, banks, consulting companies did was to start to lease massive amounts of new space and additional space in Bangalore and Hyderabad, Pune, Chennai, elsewhere, because they knew that if you can get people anywhere to do work digitally, you should double down in India. And that was a really interesting, vote of confidence, if you will. But it keeps Indians in India precisely because of COVID blocking people from leaving India. So you have created more jobs, you've brought more income into the country, you certainly are training talent remotely, but you're not solving the geographic problem by doing that. Eventually, because wages are higher if you move abroad, I still think, and of course, given the environmental and other pressures, I still think you'll have that movement. But the number, when I look at Europe, I look at Canada, look at even Central Asian countries, Middle Eastern countries, they all need English-speaking talent in precisely the fields, medicine, nursing, IT, construction, whatever the case may be, where Asia, particularly India, has a big surplus.
So you recently made a visit to Siberia, where I think you were in Krasnoyarsk, or one of those major cities in Siberia. Did you notice, I mean, of course, there's always been a good relationship between Russia and India, but who would have thought of Siberia, first of all, having massive forest fires in the summers that are much hotter than ever before? Has there always been receptivity to use Indian talent in Russia and now in Siberia, of course, now very, very important for the bit mining industry for blockchain?
Well, I don't know if they've imported Indian Bitcoin miners. They've definitely invited Indian farmers, and there's a joke that Russians are the Punjabis of the North, especially those that are the farmers out of the Far East. They're very, hardy men and women out there. Now, what's interesting is that this is a narrative that really contrasts with what you hear about from the Kremlin and what you think about when you think of Russian immigration policy. First of all, most people don't think of anything when they think of Russian immigration policy because they don't think that Russia likes to have any migrants. And certainly Vladimir Putin doesn't have a good thing to say about the migrants who live in Russia, especially if they're Ukrainian or Azerbaijani or Uzbek or whatever the case may be. But beneath the radar, or behind the scenes, what's actually happening is that Russia is bringing in lots of Indians, and they're helping to build factories, and they're doing agriculture, and they're doing mining, and a whole bunch of areas because there are very few Russians. Very few Russians live east of the Ural Mountains. Most of all 100 million Russians, almost all of them live west of the Ural Mountains, but most of Russia is east of the Ural Mountains. So when you go to Krasnoyarsk and you go to all of these towns in the far east of Russia, I meet officials and bureaucrats and administrators, and they're always saying, we need more people. We need to they say that they want their universities to start teaching English so that they can actually get students to come there. They say they need workers on railways and factories and mines, all kinds of infrastructure. They actually really need, Asians, young Asians. And they look to India actually as one of the primary places to get them. So I think that over time, you will see that what starts out as a marriage of convenience, bringing in X number of people because you need them for project Y and place Z. But that doesn't mean that people don't stay and settle. So I talk in the book a lot about Kazakhstan. And every time I go to Kazakhstan over the last 20 years, I see more and more and more Indians. And I just couldn't believe it. At some point, it's like crazy how many Indians there are in Kazakhstan. And it's for the, strangest things, but their agriculture is growing. There are more English-speaking expats there, so they need English teachers for schools. So where are you going to find English teachers nearby who speak English? Well, you're going to get them from India. Right? You need dentists, you need eye doctors, you need cooks for restaurants and hotels. Where are you going to get them? You're going to get them from India. Remember, you're talking about countries that only have 20 million people, right? But they have growing populations and growing industries. And India is the largest nearby friendly English-speaking country. So it's not at all a surprise on paper that it's happening, but it's kind of a shock when you see it in reality.
So Parag, it's fascinating to hear that, particularly about the way that English is a language that is actually a bit of a passport for Indians to be able to find interesting opportunities, not just, of course, in Russia, but all over Asia. And talking about Asia, would I be correct in saying that one of the hardest things in the world is to actually generalize about Asia? Because Asia is huge, and the Asian economies are huge. And in fact, there are more democracies in Asia than in the rest of the world. So would I be correct in saying it's hard to generalize about Asia, and particularly the different countries that will want and need Indians to come in and help them regenerate their economy in a post-COVID recovery?
It's a great question. Well, Ralph, I devoted my whole previous book to this about Asia. It's impossible to generalize about Asia. It's the most of the human population. It's 6 or 7 major civilizational groups. Definitely North and Northeast Asian countries have labor shortages. So people may not know this, but China has to import people, right? China imports Filipinos to be nurses, and will have to immigrate or import more and more people to fill these basic functions that young Chinese, either that there aren't enough young Chinese to do, or that China won't do. In Japan, there are 50,000 Indian construction workers, right? 50,000. And that number will continue to grow because you have an aging population. And again, you don't have any, there are very few young people. So Asians moving around and circulating within Asia is a huge story. There's no doubt about it. Right now, the largest number of Asians outside of their home country is already Indians in the Gulf countries. And it's Indonesians in places like Malaysia and Thailand where they work on plantations and so forth. But in the future, because of climate reasons, politics, economic growth, demographic and labor shortages, you would expect more and more Asians to be circulating around as far north as Russia, into China, into Japan, into Korea, and so forth. So, I think that's a good thing. Now, of course, Asia has no shortage of people in the aggregate, but it's where are they, what are their skills, where are they needed at any given time? And that requires a more dynamic kind of matching of people and skills and places.
So, Parag, here's a question for you. When we had the lockdown with COVID, and particularly in India, you'd mentioned the UAE, a lot of Indian workers who were in the UAE came back, and in fact, even in large Indian cities, Delhi and Mumbai and the rest of the country, Kolkata, people went back to their villages. Tell us particularly about something that you had made notice of in Bihar and the problem with, or the challenge with tractors.
Right. This is interesting. So, a lot of us have looked at the last year and a half and thought of the world as being truly locked down, nobody moving. But moving home also counts as moving. And the largest movement of people during the pandemic was Indians going back to India from the Gulf countries. And that's very, very significant. In the same way that the largest number of Asians outside of their home country or region is Indians in the Gulf countries, the largest number during the pandemic moving was them moving back. And so it turns out, and I had to look this up, I haven't gone and verified on the ground because of travel restrictions, but it is interesting that I read about how there have been shortages of tractors in Bihar. Why have there been shortages of tractors in Bihar? Because so many Indians within India, of course, moved or had to go back during lockdown, and they decided that from the standpoint of livelihoods, they would go back to farming, and they may stay as farmers. They may not decide to go back to where their previous jobs were, whether it's within India or whether it's abroad, and that led to a tractor shortage in Bihar. Now, the second dimension of the story is, remember that Bihar is an agricultural region. It's a very poor part of India, but it's actually one of the fastest growing states in India has been Bihar. And agriculture has been improving, output has been improving. They are industrializing the agriculture more, bringing in more technology, investing more in infrastructure. It's one of the key parts of India that really needs to be uplifted economically. And that includes becoming an even larger breadbasket for India. And one of the things I speculate on is whether or not, from a climate standpoint, given the river systems, the potential for better irrigation, and given the water shortages in other parts of India, that more people could wind up resettling there. Now, again, when you think about Bihar today, you don't think that it's a destination, right? That's not exactly the reputation of Bihar. But if you think about climate change and the impact of climate change on different parts of India and different sectors of the economy, you can imagine that happening.
So it's really interesting when you look at how governments deal with this whole issue of immigration and how to manage it and how to manage the impact of it. I believe that Canada has a policy whereby they take in 400,000 new permanent residents every year into Canada, Brazilian students, Syrian refugees, Indian doctors, software programmers, and so forth. The US, which is 10 times bigger population than Canada, takes in just 600,000 people a year. So from the point of view of government, if you are sitting in a prime minister's office or a president's office, and you're trying to fashion out how you deal with incoming, what would you suggest would be your advice to senior politicians or perhaps presidents as to how do you shape a policy about having, is it controlled immigration? Is it selective technology, specialist immigration? What would you say?
Great question. I mean, this is actually precisely what I do work on with governments, is to help them devise tiered immigration structures. Because right now there's this sense that it's sort of all or nothing, right? Either I'm a citizen or I'm not a citizen, and I may never become a citizen, or whatever the case may be. But instead, what is happening is governments are realizing, okay, we need foreign workers, we need young talent, so let's have an entrepreneur visa, a student visa with a pathway to citizenship, or a student visa without a pathway to citizenship, a technology visa, an investor visa, this visa, that kind of thing, and give people a ladder that they can climb over time, so that if they come to a country, if they remain a resident in good standing, if they are, crime free, if they don't commit any criminal acts, if they contribute to society and pay taxes, then they work their way up that ladder, and they still may never become a citizen, right? That's not even necessarily the issue, but it's, do you have a stable residency, right? Are you guaranteed either permanent residency or 5-year residency, something that isn't arbitrary? And the truth is actually, Ralph, that more and more countries are moving towards that model, which is actually a very good thing, because they're realizing that they need more migrants, even if they're not going to give them citizenship. So they're creating constructive and transparent policies around that. And that's, again, what Canada and quite a few other countries have done.
So just taking on what you've just said, where governments have to design a migration policy according to their society and their economic needs, obviously looking for stability and people that will play a part in society, which we have to do in the coming years. It has to be more egalitarian. For example, if you're going to allocate new immigrants into sparsely populated areas and accommodate new settlers, you're going to have to create sustainable buildings for them to live in, infrastructure to house everybody. I believe now that 3D printing is actually allowing the printing of buildings and houses in certain places, so that you could have immigration into, say, a sparse, formerly desert area or whatever it might be, or maybe a winter area. Are you seeing evidence of that in Asia?
Oh, that's not a hypothetical at all, right? We do have the technologies today to build a lot more housing that is light footprint, right? That is kind of sustainable, that is not built with concrete, that is even movable, where you have solar power and water collection and these kinds of things. So the technology does allow us to do that already today. And in terms of the question of where, well, right now it's being done more in Europe and more in Latin America than other places, but most certainly this will be necessary in Asia, because remember, we have the most, if you will, climate exposed people in the world, right? In terms of climate risk, the largest number of people in the world that are exposed to climate effects that will need to move are actually in Asia.
So I was just thinking, as you were talking about that, of what happened in Tamil Nadu and in Chennai just a short while ago, where they ran out of water in Chennai. And obviously that water pressure is a big issue. And on a geopolitical level, certainly the Himalayas and the recent conflict between the Indian military and the Chinese military in the Himalayas suggests that this whole notion of who controls the water of the Himalayas is another issue that might actually result in some kind of migration issue. And talking of China, where you'd mentioned earlier that a lot of Chinese go back to China. Obviously, the English language is a bit of a problem. We see the Belt and Roads project, where China has spent a lot of political capital and money trying to have this scheme that works. But it seems that countries that take on the Belt and Roads become indebted with loans they cannot repay. I'm thinking of Gwadar in Pakistan. I'm thinking of Sri Lanka that have had problems. I'm thinking of certain African countries that have had issues. Tell us about your thoughts of China and how India should deal with this issue regarding China.
This is a great question. So a lot of people have looked at Belt and Road and viewed it as something of a linear kind of path in which China builds something, China issues debt or credit, and it buries a country in debt, and they become utterly dependent on China in perpetuity, and they'll never grow out of it, and it's a new colonialism. That's not entirely true, even though there are examples that suggest that this has been unfair lending and it's been the wrong projects and it's unsustainable. The truth is that countries need debt to grow. You need to borrow in order to invest. And some countries invest wisely, others don't invest wisely. So I don't think it's a black or white kind of picture. The key thing is this: a country should not have to depend on China. India should be there, Japan should be there, European countries, America should all be saying, hey, wait a minute, let's give you a better deal. If you're Kazakhstan, if you're Tajikistan, if you're Mongolia, whatever the case may be, Sri Lanka, obviously, Kenya, you name it. Countries should be saying, hey, wait a minute, we don't want you to become a colony or a pawn of China. Therefore, we'll give you a better deal. We'll build your railway. We'll locate industrial activity in your country. We'll outsource to you. Use our technology. Don't use Huawei, that kind of thing. And that's what I call, simply put, putting your money where your mouth is, right? That old expression, put your money where your mouth is, applies as much to geopolitics as it does to a fight in a schoolyard. You know what I mean? And I think that we've seen a lot more, to quote Greta Thunberg, right? We've seen a lot more talk than action. But now we have both the Trump and the Biden administrations, the European Union, Japan, India through the Quad agreement, cooperating much more.
About the Quad, Parag. What is the Quad?
So the Quad is more of a military constellation, in which the US, India, Japan, and Australia are cooperating or coordinating their naval activity, looking at ways to strengthen also the military capacity of countries that are quite threatened by China, such as the Philippines and Vietnam and Indonesia. So the Quad is relatively new, as is the new Australia, US, UK alliance and so forth in terms of military hardware and so on. So there is this big effort, not just militarily, but also, Ralph, commercially, right? To say, again, we're going to give you, if you're India, if you're Indonesia, preferential trade with us, get technology from us, don't do it with China. And that process, that competition, I call it the infrastructure arms race. And it's actually just getting underway.
That's such a great phrase, the infrastructure arms race. And just thinking of how one prepares for this new arms race, obviously not weaponized, but it's creating opportunity and potential, which actually marries beautifully into the way that Indians think, are educated at the IIMs or the IITs. And one of the countries that has really stood out in Asia as a kind of, as emblematic of a success story, of course, is Singapore. And I believe you spend a lot of time in Singapore. You live in Singapore for the most part, but Singapore in a sense is a gold standard. And one of the things that characterizes Singapore's success is that they've always prided themselves on having a really effective civil service. And in fact, they're even now teaching countries around Asia to send their high-ranking civil servants to come and learn skills that maybe could bring the Singapore success story to their countries. Do you have any thoughts on that?
There's no question that, to me, one of the most essential and one of the pillars, if you will, of a functional society, of a successful society, of a role model society, is having a really strong civil service, right? And if you think about the history of this, the British had a very strong civil service, imperial service for a long time. India inherited the administrative service, but many countries have let those institutions decay. And that's happened in America too. America was built in many ways during the heyday, especially in the early 20th century with the railroads and the westward expansion, by engineers and technocrats who did everything from the Erie Canal to the Pacific railroads, to the interstate highway system and so forth. So countries really do need to have competent public administration that's non-corrupt, that's independent, that's far-sighted, that has skills in economics, engineering, math, public policy, and so on. So it's absolutely crucial. And Singapore has one of the best in the world. Australia and New Zealand are really quite good. A number of European countries like Germany and Switzerland are very strong. Canada has a great civil service. So to me, quite frankly, Frank, this is the great divide in the world. One of them is between countries that have those smart governments and institutions and those that don't. And the divide cuts across democracies and non-democracies, right? You can have non-democracies with really solid institutions. You have democracies with very poor civil service institutions. But to me, the most important is to have that core of governance be functional and be competent.
So one of the things I know that you were thinking about when you were writing your new book was to see if you could generalize about Israelis, Russians, Indians, people from Kazakhstan, Filipinos, Japanese, Australians, and Singaporeans. What would they possibly have in common? Could you, for the audience, just come up, say, with 3 or 4 things that you basically came to the conclusion were things in common between those progressive countries?
Sure. Yeah, no, I mean, this is what I call the new Asian values, right? The last articulation of Asian values was in the 1990s, and it was very China-centric and Confucian-oriented, hierarchical, and so on. So I set out to kind of sort of document what I call the new Asian values. And the first was the one we just talked about: technocratic governance, right? Competent public administration that's trustworthy, trusted by the people. The second was mixed capitalism, in which the public and private sectors cooperate with each other to shift resources and to promote innovation in key industries and to train workers and so on. So not a tug of war or civil war between government and companies, but rather cooperation between them to shape the economy. And the third was what I called social, sort of social solidarity, right? Which means that because we in Asia have very multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-religious, multiracial societies, we really have to be careful about, the sort of the nature or how we become liberal. So it's one thing to have freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, rule of law, all of those things which we should have, but not at all costs. There has to be some degree of restraint, of deference, of acknowledgement of other people's, rights and other people's fears and concerns. And so in that sense, when it comes to internet regulation and other areas, what you found actually is that instead of following the path of the US and UK, where you can lie blatantly, either as a politician or a citizen, and spread, fake news all across social media and have your entire electoral system undermined by nefarious foreign and domestic actors spreading lies and fake news. I think Asians are wisely looking at that saying, that's not for us, right? That's not for us. I don't think that Thailand likes it. I don't think that China likes it. I don't think that Korea likes it. I don't think Taiwan doesn't like it. India doesn't like it. Even Australia, which you would think of as a Western liberal democracy, has been brutal in its internet content regulation, right? Because they're saying, no way are we going to let our society be destabilized by this free-for-all that is, social media. Now, I don't endorse this going too far. I don't like censorship, right? I'm not for, censorship or self-censorship, right? But what I do think we need to have is a system where, whether it's content moderators or other kinds of tools, that you have to have some degree of curation, right, of dialogue. You should have freedom of information, but not freedom to lie. And this is all part of this idea of, what are the things that we can do to maintain social solidarity. So that's the third of the 3 new Asian values: the technocratic governance, the mixed capitalism, and the social solidarity. And I do believe that whether you're in Russia, Israel, Indonesia, Japan, Kazakhstan, or India, or Thailand, I actually believe that 4.5 billion people believe that.
So here's an interesting question from Dr. Minu Mathur. Dr. Minu Mathur didn't say where he's writing from, but or she. What should India do to make the young population of India actually be a global workforce in this post-COVID era?
How can India be a global workforce?
Yes. What should India do to make their young population become a global workforce in the way that, say, the Silicon Valley culture really started to spread all over the world?
Right. Well, I mean, we know that, of course, the Indian workforce, or at least the Indian IT sector, is well connected globally. It's very large domestically in terms of its output, and it's very large globally in terms of the value of its software exports, well over $100 billion and so forth. And we know that outsourcing and again, cloud-based work has been very beneficial for Indian workers, the Indian economy, several million of them, and then millions more who benefit in a secondary way from that. So I think all of that has been positive. But in order to broaden that, you obviously need a much better educational system, right? You need obviously a higher degree of connectivity and broadband, but you need a better educational system. And even remember that even if people are educated, Ralph, doesn't mean they instantly get jobs, right? There's a crisis in so much of the world of the overeducated and unemployed. So the answer isn't just investment. The answer isn't just technology. The answer isn't just skills. The answer isn't just jobs. It's all of those things. And that's what economic strategy for a society is about saying, what is the alignment? What resources do we devote to getting this right? And that's what I think needs to happen. And the good news is maybe that India has a long way to go, because that means that if it does get things right, it will actually create a lot more jobs in technology.
Well, it's so interesting to hear you say that. And in fact, someone was, I think that you have commented on this particular issue, where there are two kinds of societies today that seem to be emerging in this post-COVID era. One, who use democracy and data together to improve governance. And the second are those who see having data as a bad thing. So please tell us about this whole notion of data, the improvement of it, and of course, the incredible potential that India has, and Indian thinkers and all those graduates from Indian schools and Indian universities, and who really have these new data skills, the true digital natives.
It's very, very true. So of course, India has a large number, it could be that India has more digital natives than any country in the world because it's effectively the largest population, but younger than China, right? So in a way, India is a digital native country, but again, is every digital native living up to their potential, right? And where and for whom are they utilizing their skills? I used to joke that there's no good Indian websites, right? Remember the Air India website? And even Indian government websites. Now things are changing. Now, you have Aadhaar, you have Paytm. There's been a revolution. You have Indian e-commerce companies. One of the largest ed tech companies in the world, Byju's, is Indian, right? So there is enormous progress in terms of, by volume, but not necessarily in terms of the number of people. Because remember, I used to say about China, every problem in China is the biggest problem in human history, because China was the most populous country, and every problem they had, whether it was fixing the environment or coping with an aging population, those are literally the biggest problems in history. Now, for every Indian out there, you have to remember that every problem in India is the biggest problem in human history, because India effectively is a larger population than China. And no one is going to rush to fix India's problems for India. India has to do it itself. So, using technology to short circuit the resource constraints and to bring greater effectiveness, to Indian institutions and Indian life is the great challenge in the world, because it is for India, and India has so many people. So that's in a way, I think what needs to motivate young Indians who are skilled in technology and other areas. Don't just go out and work in the IT sectors of other countries and move to Silicon Valley and live your comfortable life, sipping Starbucks and driving a Tesla, right? You have to ask yourself, how can you use your skills to actually improve the conditions in India itself?
So here's an interesting issue, and that is about what we should be doing about long-term planning, particularly now, the way that in post-COVID, there's so much we can do to focus on the future, long-term modernization. Do you see in any of the Asian countries, any particular country other than India, that is really showing a talent for long-term modernization, which, other than Singapore that we've drawn attention to, have you found, for example, Vietnam is now playing an important role in the reinvention, in a sense, of the global supply chain, particularly with a lot of people saying that the difficulties of working with China are presenting problems that need to be made much easier for the global supply chain. And that's why Vietnam suddenly becomes a much more effective global supply country.
Right. So, I mean, the fact that Vietnam has capitalized on the interest in moving activity out of China, looking for lower wage countries to produce goods, the trade agreements that it's signed. So, of course, Vietnam is doing a lot of things right, but Vietnam is also, of course, a very, very, very poor country. So it has a long way to go. Do they have a strategy around attracting investment and even moving up the value chain in some of these areas? Sure. You've got great graphic designers and you have definitely some, IT programmers and stuff in Vietnam. So a little bit of that is percolating too. But in terms of socioeconomic development, it's still it has a huge agricultural sector. It has a very long way to go. I mean, its level of development is closer to India than China right now, right? So we have to be clear about that. But it is, of course, because it is an authoritarian country, it has a vision, a master plan, and it's implementing it and so forth. But, other countries, of course, rich countries like Japan, like Singapore, like Taiwan, like Korea, you can see the results of what they've done over the last decades. And they are trying to maintain their position and also continue to carve ahead and innovate by way of investments in, smart city technology, hydrogen power, Internet of Things, 5G, AI. Those are all technologies that are part of the strategic technological master plans of these countries, and they want to export those as well. So that could mean, if you look at Japan, given their labor shortages, you have lots of Chinese IT workers, lots of Chinese software programmers living in Japan. And it could be that that's an opportunity for Indians as well to go there and work in those companies and bring their technology and investment back into India, for example.
So, Parag, here's one final question that I think has got relevance. Break it into two parts. First of all, will there be more opportunity for Indian women professionals, particularly those that are educated in whatever professions they might be, in this new redefining? And secondly, we've got a question from Jitendra Muralidhar, who says, do you think English-speaking Indians between the age of 50 to 60 have chances to migrate or move to any country? So those are two of our final questions.
Great. I think they overlap, obviously. And again, I think that, let me take the second question first. As I said, there are two kinds of countries in the world: those that have realized that they have labor shortages and that they can increase their own productivity and enhance their own economies by having more young people and reaching out to, friendly societies like India to get them. And then there are countries that haven't figured that out yet, right? And so in that sense, I believe that, Indians are in demand. They're getting blue cards in Europe. They're being heavily recruited to Canada. The Biden administration is trying to expand the H-1B visa quota again to bring in more Indians. So there's no question that being a skilled Indian right now is a great person to be, right? Provided that you find the right job in the right country and can go there, or if you're doing the right things to use your skills to improve India itself, right? But it is an exciting time, I think, for that demographic. The next question was about women. And I actually do focus on women in this book, Move, in a number of sections, because of course, there are shortages of nurses and of caregivers and even, kindergarten teachers and whatnot in many countries. And you could certainly use Indian women in those roles and in IT as well. One of the jokes I make is that, and I say this kind of targeting a European audience. Europeans have had a lot of concerns about the cultural challenges of assimilating migrants from Arab countries, from Africa and elsewhere. And I say in the book, who is the least threatening migrant in the whole world? And I actually say, surely it's an educated Indian woman, an Indian female IT professional. Those are my exact words, Ralph, in the book. An educated female Indian IT professional has got to be the least threatening and certainly one of the most desirable migrants in the entire world. So I want to stand by that statement for all the women, young and old, in this conversation, because I've done my homework about what countries need and what they want and where they can get it. And I think, I guess Indians can be very proud that this should be their moment.
Well, women do hold up half the sky, as we know from that old proverb. Parag, have you got a copy of the book so that we can see the cover, so that we can?
I don't. It's not out till next week, but everyone go on to amazon.in and order your copy today. You'll get it before I do.
Excellent. And the title of the book is?
Move. How
M-O-V.
mass migration is shaping the future and what it means for you, shaping the world and what it means for you.
Move is Parag's new book. Parag, thank you so much for taking the time. I believe that you were in Madrid today. You usually live in Singapore, but you actually keying into this TEDx Gateway from Madrid.
That's right. We're back on the move.
Back on the move, just like your book says. Parag, thank you so much. It's been a great, great honor to have you giving your thoughts and your great, great knowledge of these subjects. So from all of us at TEDx Gateway, we'd like to say Bahut Dhanyavad. If you speak Tamil, we'd like to say Nandri Nanbargale. And if you speak Marathi, Dhanyavad, of course. If you speak Punjabi, Merbani. And so from everybody in India, Parag Khanna, what a great, great treasure to have you with us on TEDx Gateway.
Thank you so much, Ralph. Great to see you. Really appreciate it. Bye, everyone.
Okay, so now let's just have a look at some of our upcoming events on TEDx Gateway, some really interesting ones. Here's a fascinating one on the global lessons of Afghanistan privacy, particularly with the new Taliban government, who have actually eradicated a women's ministry. Friday, the 8th of October, 6 p.m. IST, with Nick Espinosa, who's a security fanatic, and his company, Security Fanatics, interviewed by the great Govindaraj Etiraj. So that's on Friday next week. That's worth going to. Then, how to reset your motivation in challenging times, where a great global intrinsic motivation expert from Intrinsic Labs, Sharat Jivan, will be interviewed by Megha Vishwanath, who is going to bring this very interesting area, talking about motivation. And then on the 15th of October, what comes next after globalization? This should be fascinating. Michael Sullivan, who is an investor, thought leader, someone with very interesting original views, charts out the future of a new world order characterized by digitization, climate change, some of the elements that Parag spoke about, but Michael has got some interesting views. So those of you, put a note in your diary, put it down on your computer, that 15th of October, 6 p.m. IST, same time, same station, here at TEDx Gateway. Oh, one more we've got on the 22nd, Friday, the 22nd of October. The world has changed. Why haven't schools changed? Davina Gupta, who presents for Work Life India at the BBC, will be interviewing Diane Taverner, an educator and author of note. She's a leading thinker in education, focusing on why it's high time that conventional teaching undergoes an overhaul. So, we've got, Saturday, the 23rd of October. This is a good one. This is really a good one. Profiling hackers, the psychology of cybercrime. So what goes on in the mind of a cyber criminal, reminding us why it's at the core of this major, major modern human problem. Mark Hoffman is an analyst of crime and a profiler of crime and hackers. That should be fascinating. That's on Saturday, the 23rd of October. Don't miss Mark Hoffman, who'll tell you why hacking is not lacking. Okay, so there you are. You've got 5 wonderful sessions coming up. We'd like to say a big thank you to Yashraj Akashi, and of course to our wonderful team, Amir Ahmed, and of course Garaj Rawat, Pankaj Jeswani, Sushmita Murthy, Priyanka Patil, Hemali Gandhi, Omkar, Rashmi, Joanna, an incredible team. So my name is Ralph Simon from London. We love TEDx Gateway, but we love even more our wonderful audience that's out there all across India and across the world. So Goodbye to everybody. Thank you so much. Mahut, mahut, dhanyavad.